Hi there, welcome back to the summit. For our next guest, we have Jenn Kozek. She is the author of Healing Without Hurting, and she does a lot of awesome stuff online and in the ADHD education, autism education world. And she's going to share with us today some great stuff about her own journey and then really help give some direction for those of you that want to really be helping their kids function to their highest potential. So thanks for joining us today, Jenn. And I'd love to just start by you telling us a little bit about how you got to where you are now and doing what you're doing.
Yeah, so thank you so much for having me on. So I have been a psychotherapist in the mainstream medical world since 2000, and I worked alongside psychiatrists. I worked in psych hospitals for the very beginning of my career, probably for the first 8 years or so. And during that time, I learned a lot about the efficacy of medication and how important it was in managing ADHD, autism, spectrum kind of symptoms such as depression, anxiety, OCD. And I never really questioned the authority of doctors that had many more years of medical training, and it wasn't until I had my own son that it started exhibiting some of these symptoms, and I started recognizing that some of my young patients on these medications were having very, very bad side effects to the medication, that I knew in my heart, like, medication was not the direction that I wanted to go in. And so I decided to kind of go on my own journey at that point and look for ways to help him. And it was actually my aunt, who is a champion of alternative medicine, who kind of put me onto holistic medicine and put me onto diet and nutritional deficiencies and food sensitivities, and kept telling me over and over again that my son displayed a person that it might have like an autoimmune issue going on, and I had no idea that an autoimmune issue in the gut could mean brain encephalitis and issues in the brain. I had no idea that the brain and the gut were connected until then.
Yeah, gotcha. So then you started to see these different. What were some of the things what were some of the symptoms that you were noticing in your son?
Yeah, so, from very early on, he had a lot of gross motor, fine motor skills issues, and I just figured he had some developmental delays. I think, I had some developmental delays as a kid, so I never really thought much of it. But he also started exhibiting, violent rages of, basically anger episodes over the smallest of things. After about 15 months old, he stopped sleeping soundly at night. He had a lot of anxiety. He did a lot of stimming, where the kids' nervous systems are just overactive. And, over and over again, I would talk to my colleagues and they're like, oh, it just seems like he has some ADHD issues. Like, you probably, there's always medication, but, he's too young. Maybe I'd start it when he starts school because it's going to interfere. And so I kind of always had that in the back of my mind, is that's what I would probably have to do. This is how my mainstream education was setting it up, so that I would believe that that would be the only way, because that's the only way I was ever taught, trained. Pharmaceutical companies used to come in and talk to all of us as young therapists and talk about why we had to medicate a child with ADHD or anxiety, talking about the fact that they could potentially have a drug addiction problem or alcohol problem later on, because if we didn't medicate them, that they would seek out self-medication, and that this way it was a very controlled way of making sure that they didn't become drug addicts. But I had no understanding that an ADHD medication was actually like a class B amphetamine, and that I was basically giving my child speed as a way to calm him down. And so I never even thought about it, actually, until my aunt started talking to me about naturopaths and functional medicine doctors. And it wasn't until I started to do my own research that I recognized, like, oh, shoot, like, this isn't, what is medication anyway, but a bunch of chemicals that basically masks a symptom. And so when I started to learn, the more I started to learn, the more I started to recognize that there really was help outside mainstream medical thinking.
Gotcha. So in that journey, then, what were the first things you explored, and what were the first things you did with your son?
So the very first thing I did was take him to a GI specialist, and because I said, oh, wait, brain gut connection. Let me take him to an allergist. Let me take him to a GI specialist. And I did that. They looked at me like I was crazy, like I had 10 heads. My GI doctor told me that Evan could not have celiac disease or couldn't have a gluten sensitivity because he did not have celiac disease. The ENT told me that we had to take out the tonsils and the adenoids because he was chronically sick all the time. By the way, it's very connected. A poor immune system means that these kids, not only do they have behavioral symptoms and mood issues and foggy brain, but they also could exhibit symptoms and signs of somebody who has, gut issues, which present themselves as, chronic ear infections, dark circles under the eyes, a lot of soft signs that there is something going on in the immune system. Evan was chronically sick. We had to rent a nebulizer so often that we ended up buying our own. So often, how we start to recognize that this is really autoimmune related is we start to recognize that there, besides the mental manifestations of these issues, there's also a physical components of these issues too, that many mainstream doctors, our GI specialist was like, oh, his constipation has nothing to do with his brain fog. Wow, did I learn after the fact how wrong he was. And this was supposed to be a specialist in GI medicine for pediatrics. Like, this is really scary. And so that was my first invitation into that world. And actually, I had the GI doctor tell me that I was reading too much and that I should get off the internet. And I'm so glad he said that to me, because that is exactly what propelled me to go find doctors that would actually listen to me and validate all that I had been learning on the internet from other moms, to the medical journals that obviously our mainstream medical doctors were not reading.
Yeah. And so what kind of providers did you find that did listen to you and explore those roads that you were researching yourself?
So when I started to look for functional medicine doctors, there wasn't a lot in our area, and they were a little bit more expensive, and not all of them took insurance. So I actually found a naturopath who was only 10 miles from my house, and I wrote to her, I emailed her, and it was like music to my ears. I mean, she told me to bring Evan right in, and so I did. And we did a 2-hour evaluation. I mean, I have never been to a doctor where they actually took 2 hours with a 5-year-old child. So my son was 5. And what on earth can you possibly talk about in 2 hours? Well, everything, like from before his birth to all the way till his 5-year-old birthday. She looked at his fingernails. She looked at the cradle cap on the top of his head and said, does he have speech delay? And I said, yes. She says it's connected. I said, what? And so she started looking at his earlobes for creases in his earlobes for food sensitivities. She just took a look at not only his, physical body, but just how his expression, and took a list of symptoms and kind of came up with a plan, to do some, very vigorous testing. So we did food sensitivity testing. We started off with some testing to check for yeast overgrowth. We did a whole, fecal testing, which will show the composition of gut bacteria. A lot of people will take lots of probiotics, but wouldn't it be fantastic? And it is fantastic that we could even figure out exactly what strands of probiotics a child needs. And so she started to do this whole investigation on Evan, and the lab work doesn't lie. And the lab work showed us a whole bunch of things that we would never have gotten if we went to a regular physician.
Gotcha. So you mean like food sensitivities, or what kind of things?
Yeah, so I asked the allergist, and we tested at the allergist for food allergies, and it's a completely different test. And I didn't even understand that there was a food intolerance test. It's an IgG, food sensitivity test, where the mainstream doctors are doing IgE testing, for looking for, things like hives and things like that from a from a prick test. Allergies and food sensitivities are different, but they both can wreak havoc. And so the naturopath actually went deeper into try to figure out what foods Evan was particularly sensitive to. And when we recognized that he had many foods he was sensitive to, then, he was kind of diagnosed with leaky gut syndrome. And at 5 years old to have leaky gut syndrome, like, this is a shame, and and I couldn't understand what causes, so in my kind of researching mind, I needed to know, well, why does a 5-year-old have heavy metal in their body? Why does a 5-year-old have leaky gut? And what causes leaky gut? And so I just started to doing more and more investigation, to find out that genetically modified foods and pesticides were killing off all the good gut bacteria and causing leaky gut, that all the processed food and all the chemicals I was feeding Evan, and although, we tried to, cook food and be healthier, I didn't realize that the foods we were eating weren't as healthy as I thought they were, and that I was contributing to a lot of his symptoms. And so there are lots of causes of a poor immune system, and the list goes on. In my book, Healing Without Hurting, I go into all of the assaults of the immune system, and there are many. So it's never one size fits all. But I started to recognize, this is an autoimmune disorder. Like, this is something, and when I was reading testimonials of children that were getting better, what was always the common denominator was the gut and the gut health, and the fact that a lot of these kids had symptoms like food sensitivities, like life-threatening allergies. It's a symptom that the immune system is overreacting. our immune system is a fantastic situation in which it really, we need inflammation. It actually is, it's a way of protecting our body. But when it goes on overboard, it can cause many symptoms, including mental health symptoms.
Yeah, we're we're definitely starting to hear more and more about that, the gut brain connection and so forth. So you just sort of tracking where we are now. So you were in sort of the standard mainstream psychology, psychiatry world. You had your own son. He displayed these symptoms. Something inside you said, I don't want to put him on medication. Plus, it sounds like, even with that consideration, he was too young when you were first realizing this, even if you had wanted to go that route.
Right. For me, I was too young, right?
Yeah. And so you started researching, tried going to these specialists. They told you stuff like stop researching so much. Great bedside manner there. And so then you found somebody who helped, who saw eye to eye with what you were learning, did these tests, found that stuff. So I'm assuming, obviously, that you took those foods out of, his diet, and
Yep.
And so.
Well,
I guess,
first I cried for 2 days.
Well,
I had to add in, I cried for 2 days before removing the food.
Because of what you had to remove.
I remember the last piece of pizza we, Evan ever ate, traditional pizza, because I cried. I was like, how are we going to do this? Like, this is everything he eats.
Yeah.
And, I remember telling the naturopath, like, I think he's going to starve. And she looked right at me. She goes, Jen, the reason he has symptoms is because he is starving. And I was like, oh, okay. And then I learned about nutritional deficiencies and how they contribute to all these issues. And when you have an inflamed intestinal system, your nutrients are not getting absorbed the way that they need to. And so even if a child's taking supplements, or even if they're eating generally healthier, the body is not going to benefit from that if their immune system is all compromised and their gut's inflamed.
Gotcha.
So, yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah,
so you cried for 2 days, and then.
And then after I cried for 2 days, and my husband was still not totally on board, although he, I was the one reading 50,000 books, so I was the expert at this point, and so he had to listen to me, and so we just went 110%. I see some people like, well, we're doing this slowly. Like, how do you take a Band-Aid off slowly? Just take it off and heal it, right? And put the medicine on and heal it. So what we did was we eliminated the foods that were the most irritating, and we started implementing. I started to give him digestive enzymes. So if there were some foods that he was still eating that he couldn't digest well, we started with digestive enzymes, probiotics, but we also did a lot of herbal remedies such as slippery elm, L-glutamine, which is an amino acid that's very good with sealing the gut wall. We did marshmallow root. So there were, a bunch of herbs that we introduced to him. They tasted awful. I mean, they tasted like tree bark, and like people were like, how do you get your kid to eat that? And so what I did was I would put it in water. I'd mix it in water, and I would use a needleless syringe, and I would give it to him just like I was giving him penicillin or any other medicine, because this was his medicine, and I didn't care that he didn't like the taste of it. We were healing his gut, and so we had to do what we had to do, and I had to do as a mom what I needed to do. And so this is what we did for 6 weeks, 3 times a day. And while we were, reintroducing, probiotics and doing all those other things and trying to boost his immune system. And so, I wanted to go in right away and detox all the heavy metal. And my naturopath was like, no. You need to do this systematically. You need to do it safely. And so we need to heal the gut first. We need the bowels to be moving and the constipation to lessen. And she said, by changing the diet and doing these things, we might not have to do any really aggressive yeast protocol, because he did have yeast overgrowth. And a lot of people will just go right in for the protocol. And she said, no, we won't do that, because the body should self-correct if you do the right things for it. And so that's what we did. And we did retest for yeast, and his yeast was so much better after about 6 weeks or 8 weeks of doing all of this treatment that I was doing on him. So we never had to go the aggressive yeast route. And of course, she recommended I cut down on the sugar, and, I introduced bone broths to him, and started making like lots of bone broth. So we were sort of doing the GAPS diet, but not really, because it could be very, very, very stringent on a young child. And so, he was 5, like there was no way we were going to just be able to do bone broth for 6 weeks. And so my naturopath agreed, like that's not going to work for him. And so we wanted, just mostly with food, mostly with diet, mostly with some herbal supplements. And yeah, then we were on our way. And when we started seeing improvements, like I kept going because there's lots of underlying causes of these issues. And once you heal the gut, and then you might need to look at the adrenals, you might have to look at the liver, especially if a kid has a lot of anger issues. And so, it's kind of like healing takes time. It's not like take a pill, get better. It's kind of like we do this and then it gets better, and we do this and it gets a little better, and then we wait a little while because we don't have the money for that test. But when you see glimmers of hope, you just keep going.
Right. Yeah, well,
Right.
that's what I think of. It's like I know you and I have spoken before, and one of the frustrations a lot of times with people who work in this field of, trying to help and educate parents of ways they can, help their kids heal from these autoimmune conditions is what you were just saying, like, oh, we're going slowly, or we're taking gluten out. But I don't, but I think what underlies that for a lot of people is it's a big change that they're being asked to do, and they don't necessarily have 100% confidence that it's going to solve the problem. Right. So that's hard to motivate yourself to change everything if 6 months later you're gonna be like, it didn't really work. Now we got to change everything again. And so so as, a mom and a person in this story that we're talking about, the story of your life, what do you think it was for you that you were able to or wanted to do all these changes? How did you get that confidence that it was actually going to make a difference?
Well, when I saw the blood work and I saw that Evan was in the red for gluten, dairy, egg, mustard, of all things, almonds, I recognized at that moment that if I give him these foods, I am literally poisoning his system. That's how I had to look at it. And that, for some people that might seem very extreme, but that's how I had to convince myself that this was the right thing to do for him. Because when you look at that black and white paperwork and you go, oh my goodness, like I cannot believe that he is reacting to these foods. And then when we started pulling these foods out of his diet and we noticed that his mood improved, that he started speaking more clearly, that his brain fog started lifting, that he started to sleep better, it didn't take long either. But you have to do it. Like you have to do all of it. Like if you just take out the gluten and think, well, a little ice cream here and there can't hurt. When you're doing the healing piece, you have to eliminate the food. All of it, because you're just basically leaving a scab on. So it's like you take the gluten out, which might have been one of the offenders, you eat an ice cream cone, basically you're still disrupting the gut lining. The gut is not happy, and you'll never get the desired results unless you kind of do it all together, kind of like we're going to do this for 2 months. We're going to heal the body for 2 months, and then we're going to slowly reintroduce some of these foods back into the diet, because some of them you want them to be able to eat. For Evan and even my daughter Elena, they're both very sensitive to gluten and dairy. And unless I move to Italy and start drinking raw milk from a farm and start having, organic wheat, maybe then we would do that. But, when I do the research on the food in this country and what we've done to it, I don't really see some of the food that we have on our store shelves as food anymore. And that took some time. That wasn't immediate. We started with the 2 months of gut healing, started doing more and more research, recognizing that these foods, even the foods I was giving him, and truthfully, when you cut dairy and gluten out, you're really cutting a lot of processed food out automatically. I was also cutting out things like McDonald's kind of quickly, because you recognize that all of those things, even the French fries, have dairy in it. And then when I started to do more research for my book and I recognized what are all these preservatives and all these food additives, they're only causing neurotoxicity. So again, we can do one thing and not do something else, and we're still in the same boat we were in before. So I think it is a lifestyle change. I don't think it's something that, you wake up one day and just be like, oh my God, my life's going to be totally different today. And but over time, when you recognize, that our kids need this help. And, truthfully, if you have a child with high functioning autism, or you have a child with, just ADD, and I say that because some kids are just really a little fidgety, or it's harder to convince them that, you want to do these changes because they can look really drastic, But what I also recommend, what I also want everyone to recognize is that if you have a brewing autoimmune issue and you have a food sensitivity untreated, and there's been many studies on it and doctors that will verify what I'm saying, if left untreated, it's chronic inflammation over a chronic amount of time, and that will lead to a full-blown autoimmune disorder. And whether it's when they're 20 and they get rheumatoid arthritis, or they're 40, or they're 50. So when we recognize that what we're doing for our children's health today is also going to impact their entire health profile going forward, that also helps make that decision easier.
Gotcha.
At least for me.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense, as you start putting it into perspective like that. So you made these changes, and so what can you give some contrast for like where Evan was symptomatically and where he is now?
Yeah, absolutely. So when we started this journey, and he was 2011, I want to say, he was, like I said, he was stimming. He wasn't sleeping. He'd go into fits of rage. He couldn't focus. He needed a communication device in kindergarten because they didn't feel like he'd have enough speech, intelligible speech, to be able to communicate. So they were going to give him a typewriter type of thing. And by the time, we worked this from December, we started the programming because we held him back. So he didn't start kindergarten until he was 6. By the time we started kindergarten when he was 6, there was no longer a need for that communication device. He was making more eye contact. He was communicating more clearly. He was sleeping. He wasn't having mood issues. He was attending at school. He was sitting down and, writing out letters. He was much, much, much more engageable. He started to play imaginatively, and this is something most parents will take for granted. I mean, Evan never played with played with toys. He would just kind of look at them, or if he would, we would give him a lot of toys that kind of lit up, and that was kind of really kind of interesting to him. Even at 4 years old, there wasn't a lot of interacting, not only with people but with the world around him. And when we started to do some of these things in the diet, we just started to see that shift almost overnight, honestly. And now he's 12 and a half. He's in a traditional school, in a traditional classroom. The only services he gets at this point at school are he gets some extra reading help, so he has a little bit of a learning disability still, and little learning disability and things like that. But other than that, I mean, most people would say he's on the spectrum. I never would imagine he's on the spectrum. He doesn't have this, or this. Is it a cure? Well, some children lose their diagnosis 110%, and we have lost our autism diagnosis 110%. But, he's still Evan. He still has his little quirks and the things that we love about him, and he's still very lovable, and it doesn't change who he is. It never will change who he is, and that's why so many people say, well, I don't want to do this because it's going to derail my child the way they are supposed to be. And no, it's only enhanced Evan's life. It's only made him more being more social, that's a thing. I think he might be a salesman. I don't think he ever would be a salesman if we didn't do these things for him. And so we want him to maximize his own potential, whatever that potential is. And I knew one of the ways to get him there was to do some of these treatments and therapies, and, also can't discredit, OTs and PTs and neurofeedback and brain balance therapy and integrating those reflexes and doing all of those therapies and chiropractic care, craniosacral therapy. I mean, there are so many wonderful modalities out there that all basically different vehicles getting to the same place. And not only did we change his diet, but we started to do a lot of these therapies as well. And it was like a symphony. Things just started coming in quicker. I really think that the dietary changes just catapulted the rest of the therapies to make them more effective. So I definitely think that, not only is the diet and all of that important, but we have to also kind of get that brain back on the tracks in many, many different ways.
Gotcha. So how did you go from then mom researching, healing your own child to author of a book that helps other people do the same?
Very good question. So in July of 2012, I sat down in my backyard and I thought to myself, gee, I've been through a lot. I know a lot now. And wouldn't it be great to write a pamphlet for parents just to kind of give them the 8 things to look for and the 8 things to do? And that just turned into a bigger and bigger project. Interestingly, I always knew that I'd be an author. I never knew what I was going to write about. But it was something I've known ever since I was a little child. And so when the opportunity sort of presented itself, I was like, well, this might be it. I don't know. And then, unfortunately, I was a therapist for lots of first responders and also families after Sandy Hook, Connecticut. So I was 10 miles from Sandy Hook, and I started to do a lot of counseling after the tragedy, the massacre, and recognized that we weren't doing anything for Adam. And, we can talk gun control, we can talk all these other things all day long, but we really have to talk about the child, because in a lot of cases they are children, even if they're 20-year-old children, um, and what we aren't doing as a society to bridge the gap between mental health and health in general, and that there is a connection, and that we really need to start looking at it as the same thing. And so, I started my Facebook page in January of 2013. And I have had numerous parents, message me and say, my child was homeschooled, my child was pulled out because of aggressive behavior. I had one mom from Minnesota tell me that her child had a hit list out for like all the kids on the basketball team at school. And since reading my book and applying a lot of the principles and following me on Facebook and getting to the right positions, her child is now back in school with friends. Her child is doing fantastic. He's no longer an angry, social kind of misfit kind of kid. He's actually in the world, the way he was always meant to be. And so I knew from that story on that I had to keep going, and that I would just make it my mission to educate parents as best as I could and try to lead them to these services and these therapies, because most people have no idea about them. Or if they do, they think it's impossible or it's not affordable. And it really, and people ask me all the time, well, how expensive is this? It really depends on your state. It really depends on how many naturopaths you have in your district. It really depends on your own insurance. But for me, like, I just knew, like, it wasn't a choice. Like, it was not a choice. Like, I had to do whatever I had to do to get my son in a better place. And I also wanted to, then teach other parents to do the same, because there is hope for our children. And we can't say that all children on the spectrum would ever do such a thing, and that would be a horrible statement to make. And that's not true, because 99.99% of our kids would never, ever get to that place. But we have children that have OCD, and that's, we don't, ADHD and OCD are cousins of each other. And if OCD goes awry, and OCD leads our children to start thinking about mass shootings and violent video games and hurting people, and we don't know where that can go. And medication in some cases can and does push some children, a percentage of children, into that psychosis range. And so could we try to avoid that? Like, could our doctors start getting on board with some of these treatments and start testing these things and start recognizing that this is real? So it's very frustrating, because I know I get a lot of like pushback from lots of people, but I don't care, because I'm just going to keep telling my story and hope that it helps one more child.
Awesome. So you wrote the book, and then I know you do speaking as a result of that. When did the book, when was it originally published?
So the book was originally published in 2012 at the end of the end of 2014. So like November 2014. And November of this year, I have updated the book. So it will be available on audiobook in November. And it will also, there is, slight updates, slight changes, some things have changed, not a lot. A lot of people will say, oh, the book's old now. No, this is old medicine, by the way, people. This is not new. Like, our doctors knew about this years and years and years before pharma came around. And so a lot of what's in the original book is exactly what it still is today. But I did add things like EMFs and and fluorescent lighting, and I added a little bit more about histamine issues in children. And so I've added some sections of the book, but it's basically the same. Plus, there was a new ruling that just came out with Monsanto. So, I added a section, is this the beginning to the end of the chemical error? So I added a paragraph about that. So there's some minor changes to the book. So the book, will be, is being updated actually as we speak. So I run a Facebook group. I have my book page, which is Healing ADHD and Asperger's Without Hurting. And I'm so glad we have lots of followers on there. And then you and I, Brad, started a private Facebook group, because we really felt that we needed to reach more parents that needed more assistance, maybe a little bit more hand-holding. The book, although wonderful and very easy to read, for some people it's harder for them to implement, and they need it kind of chunked down. And so, Brad and I have, formed a group together. And Brad, you could put the link there on the bottom of this afterwards. Yep. To just kind of, offer up workshops. So we do workshops, we do Q&As. We're going to start having some local guest speakers on there. just to kind of give even more of a robust kind of treatment and just to give people a little bit more support while going through this. I was getting tons of emails every day, tons of messages on Facebook, and it's impossible for me to clone myself. And so I thought, doing this group with Brad would be a fantastic idea, because this way I can reach more people and we can have more of an intimate conversation. So we do a whole Q&A where people ask very specific questions about their children and so forth and so on. So it's been a fantastic resource, and I'm so glad Brad and I have, even though we're on completely different coastlines, we've been able to manage to get this done. And so I'm really happy about that.
Awesome. So then you mentioned the different coastlines, but you happen to be on the West Coast now, down in Hollywood area. Do you want to tell us why you're there? What are you doing in California?
Yeah, so my story is actually being featured as a short film documentary at the Awareness Festival in Hollywood, California, actually tomorrow at 2 p.m. So I'm very excited. I'm actually staying at a new friend's house. She's actually one of my followers on Facebook, and she's offered up her home. She's only about 40 minutes outside LA, and so she offered me to come to her beautiful home here and spend a couple days with her before heading to Hollywood. So I'm going to be heading to Hollywood right after this interview and meeting up with a few of my followers in Hollywood and going out to dinner after. So it should be really fun.
Awesome. So that we're pre-recording this because the viewing tomorrow will actually be a few days ago by the time you guys are watching this. But tell us the name, and is there a way for people to catch your short film if they want to?
Yeah, absolutely. And so now that we're finishing up with the film festival, we were in a few film festivals, and so that's just finishing up now. And so now that it has been finished, then I'll be able to release it. So www.healingwithouthurting.com is my website. And if you go on there and sign up for my email updates, you will automatically get a free download of a free ebook that I did on the 8 steps that you can take if you're new to this, and also some other really neat stuff about how to start this journey. And in addition to that, you will be updated when that film is released officially. And we have to figure out exactly what channels we're going to be doing that with, and that's my next conversation. And yeah, so it's going to be available very shortly. I would think by the fall. I would think probably by winter time it should be out and available. So it's also available on the Heal documentary site. So if you go to healdocumentary.com, my story is actually part of the extras on that film. And so it was very fantastic. I had a film crew come out a couple years ago to my house to film our story, and it was just really exciting to do that.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So I'll put those links below, and that's did you say eight things to do? Anyway, the free ebook, the resources.
Yes, I think eight things to do to start your journey, and it's all part of a free ebook.
Awesome. So so we'll have that link below for you guys to click on to take advantage of those free resources and to stay updated about the release of the short film. So I think that did you have anything else you want to say before we finish our interview today?
Nope. I just want everyone to follow their gut feeling and their instincts, and never let anyone tell you that you can't do this, because you can, and there are thousands and thousands of parents that will tell you that. And so never give up. It's a journey. It doesn't always happen overnight. Our kids go forward 3 steps and back 2 steps. That's totally part of the journey. So don't get discouraged if you've made some changes and things have gotten a little bit better for your son or daughter, but it's still not exactly where you want it to be. Because again, you have to remember the hormones are constantly changing and things are changing in their body, and things, have to kind of get tweaked and readjusted, and it's progress, not perfection. And so definitely I encourage everybody to, just do as much research as you can, read as much as you can. If you need a book that is very comprehensive, my book Healing Without Hurting it also has 16 pages of medical references at the end of each of those chapters. There's many, many pages of references. And so, I encourage you, or any people in your lives that don't really believe this to be true, that it is true. So I'm here to say that it is, and it's happening every day. And I think people are catching on more and more every day. Thanks, Brad, for doing this whole series.
You're welcome. And before I let you go, I did want you to say, or to tell us also about your other book, because we didn't talk about that one at all.
Right. No. So I have another book. It's called A Healthy New Me and ADHD Free. And it is a children's book. that I personally mail to you, and I also sign it. It's an excellent book for little kids, probably ages 6 to even 13 or 14. It has a whole glossary in the back, and it's just basically a journey about a little boy named Michael who has ADHD and some of the changes that he has to make in his diet and the doctors that he sees and the things that he does to feel better at school and to feel better overall. So it's a really great book for anybody that wants their kid to kind of get on board with this. It's very important that the children also get on board with what we're doing with them and that they are part of the treatment plan, because they are the most intuitive little creatures. And I tell you what, when you get them excited about doing this for themselves, many times they get on board with you. So definitely a resource for that as well.
Yeah, awesome. Especially because it's coming from someone other than the parent. You know, it's like they tune us out, right? So if you're reading it in a book, it just reinforces it. So it's great for that.
It is great. And for those that are already doing this journey, it's also great for them because it validates them and it gives them a character that's just like them. And so that's always helpful too.
Yeah, awesome. All right. Well, thanks so much for taking your time with us. Your busy Hollywood debut down there, and
Thank you.
we'll look forward to people following those links and catching up with what you're up to going forward.
Thanks so much, Brad.
All right. Take care.